I've been on the road now for 4 weeks. I initially started this East Coast road trip on the HOPEN Road, driving from Maine to Georgia, initially to attend the Flattober Flat Earth Conference in Greenville, South Carolina, which was absolutely amazing. I was able to meet a lot of really cool people, and my particularly favorite person to meet was M.W.A from M.W.A. And the story goes is that I was invited to the event via Karen B, and I kept telling her she needs to invite Mike Williams, who lives relatively close to Greenville, and she contacted him and he agreed to come. And not only was he there, but he gave a really impressive hour-long lecture, and then I was able to actually meet him in the evening, and I gifted him some of the flat earth artwork that I had got printed up, and gave him a nice gift. Met him and his wife and had a really amazing time. Hung out with some of my friends that I had met over the years at the different conferences I had been to, and the community is really incredible. I really love the truth community, and the alternative media research scene is just full of a lot of kindred spirits. So that was the beginning of this road trip, and from there I ended up spending some time up in Asheville and in the regions outside of Asheville, hanging out with some friends. And then I moved my way down to Georgia, hung out with my daughter and some friends there, and spent some time in North Georgia, and went into Atlanta, and then now I'm working my way back up the coast via the mountain route. I always like to take the interstate that follows the Appalachian mountain range. It's a much quieter and more contemplative route than, say, 95 is. So I'm working my way back up the coast. It's been exactly a month, and I'm heading back into New England, and particularly into the Maine region. And I'm going to be excited to connect with all of my New England friends and Maynard friends as I continue to tattoo and adorn people with temple embellishments, do my research and study, make some new artwork, and just live my creative lifestyle that I live, officially kind of traveling around and being nomadic, and always kind of, like I said, on the HOPEN Road. So the series that I'm doing right now that I want to start is this idea called these 5-minute monologues, where I'm going to set a kitchen timer, and for 5 minutes I have to talk about a particular topic and try to consolidate it and delineate it into a 5-minute soundbite, so to speak. And then once the bell goes off, then I'll go on to the next topic, and I'll have to talk for 5 minutes about that topic. I think the way that I want to go to is to have it to where it's a nice balance between light topics and darker topics, or topics revolving around uplifting ideas, and then topics revolving around kind of heavier narratives. So I'm going to be kind of going back and forth, and I think I want to talk about all kinds of interesting things. I just literally want to have a cornucopia of topics that I can speak about in the context of these 5-minute monologue. And the thing about me is I really like talking about a lot of different things. I'm kind of I've got a really broad terrain. I always like to climb up to the highest mountaintop, so to speak, and to look out at the terrain and connect the dots. So I'm always studying and researching a lot of different ideas and disciplines, and then I'm able to try and get a handle on the larger picture of the human condition that we're in. So that's what this series is going to represent, is this attempt to have a broader conversation about everything on this beautiful terra firma that we live on. With that stated, let's begin the journey. truck in front of me actually says Atkinson. Well, let's set the timer. I got 5 minutes to talk about a topic. I'm going to spontaneously just think of a topic every time. And what do we got here? 5 minutes. Okay, there we go. What topic should I talk about first? Let me think. Why don't I talk about the concept of consciousness? Consciousness is this really abstract, kind of metaphysical idea of what it means to be sentient. So as a sentient being, there appears to be a form of awareness within us, a consciousness that resides within our bodies. And you can close your eyes, you can gaze upon consciousness in a meditative state. You can see consciousness manifesting in the dream world. You can feel consciousness in those quiet moments in any time of the day where you witness and gaze upon your thoughts meandering through all kinds of different terrains. And the idea, I think, that's powerful about consciousness itself is this debate happening over the idea on whether or not consciousness exists outside the body itself when you die and when you pass on. And I personally believe that consciousness transcends death, and that we actually will live on and gaze upon the higher realms when our bodies shut down, and that consciousness survives death. One of the reasons why I really emphatically believe in that is that I have the empirical evidence and the anecdotal experience of having hundreds and hundreds of out-of-body experiences starting at a really young age. And these really profound, stunning, metaphysical out-of-body projections, or OOBs, where my consciousness lifts out of my body and appears to travel onto the astral plane or into these other higher realms. So I've actually experienced what it's like for the body to remain in one spot as consciousness and spirit travels into those higher realms. And at a very early age, I started having these experiences. I didn't know what was happening. And then in my 20s, I started. This was during the analog era when you had to acquire knowledge by going to bookstores, and there was no internet, so I would go to bookstores all the time and go into the paranormal section. I started collecting books on astral projection and reading all kinds of literature on it, and really developed a pretty intense relationship to that phenomenon. Well, over the years, I learned that scientism, the scientism cult, what makes it so debased is this idea that in science is that this idea that consciousness does not exist after the body dies, that there's no consciousness embedded within matter. And I think that is an absolute fallacy, and they're actually pushing a pseudo-scientific paradigm and a scientism concept that is actually against spirit. It's against consciousness. And me, as in part, celebrating the scientific method and the scientific process, I believe that mysticism and consciousness need to be united with the scientific method. And I like to use the term transcendental science. So I would consider that consciousness needs to be worked into the fabric of studying and researching this realm, and to be able to use science while also acknowledging that spirit and consciousness and hyperdimensional reality actually exist too. So I think that consciousness is a profound topic to talk about and postulate and try to get a handle on. And philosophically, I think it's an absolutely fascinating yarn to spin. And from my particular experience, I believe that consciousness is primary, and that it probably more so than matter is. Like maybe consciousness came first and then matter followed. this whole idea of like as above, so below, as it is in heaven, it is on earth, kind of idea that maybe consciousness manifested this material realm that we live in. But yeah, so with all that stated, there we go. Perfect timing. Well, that's the end of that 5-minute monologue. Let's go on to another one. So the thing to talk about, what do I want to talk about? I think at times I want to bring up some memories. So why don't I talk about my days, my art school days. I went to art school in the early 1990s, from 1991 to 1993. I ended up getting a scholarship, a $12,000 scholarship I won at the end of my high school era, and ended up going to art school for basically for free. I didn't have to pay for it because of this scholarship, and that was the only real way I could actually pull it off. But I had a really amazing time at the Columbus College of Art and Design, CCAD. It was a really magical time. I was in my early 20s. I was actually a really kind of a tragic introvert. I had really antisocial tendencies. Kept to myself, didn't really have any friends, didn't date anybody, and was literally obsessive about getting straight A's. I went to art school with this intense love and craving for knowledge and for developing a skill set, and I was hyper focused. It was incredible. I was literally would go to all my classes, would pay attention, and then I'd go right to my dorm room. On the first year I stayed in the dorm room. On my freshman year, in the second year I stayed at a place on Oak Street. I lived in the garret by myself up in the third floor of this dingy house. But the general sentiment is that I got straight A's. I did really good. I focused. I learned a lot. I became well versed in every discipline that I studied, and I just had the most incredible time. When I look back on those 2 years, I don't think I would be the artist that I am now if I didn't have that solid 2 years of primary education and formal training on a lot of different disciplines. I literally took all the basic classes from drawing, illustration, figure drawing, painting, sculpture, glass blowing, ceramics, graphic design, industrial design, structural drawing, and a lot of, exciting kind of academic classes like English literature and psychology and history of art. I really had a really incredible time. I really didn't develop any friendships then. Though I was friends with a few people, there's none that actually I'm still connected with. I think it was because I was so socially isolated from the kind of traumatic teenage years I had, that I was very antisocial and guarded around the social arena. But then right after art school, I got directly catapulted into tattooing, and I've been tattooing now for almost 27 years of tattooing. Started in 1993, right after I left art school. But yeah, when I look back in hindsight, I'm so thankful for that time in art school, and I hold it in high regard, and I've really kind of romanticized that time in Columbus, Ohio. The other, man, I've got so many great memories of that era, and I think it was because I was so studious and so focused, and all of my memories are around making artwork and manifesting different things, and all the research and the music I got into. Even back then's when I discovered a lot of literature and poetry and world music. I got into so many different disciplines, political science and activism, and all kinds of curious intellectual and academic and artistic intrigue, I just discovered it was a real blossoming for me back then, and I really was really grateful for that. Immediately after that, oh, there we go. That's it. Magic. What a topic that is. The rise of the esoteric arcane tradition of magic in our culture and our pop culture has completely exploded. It's important to delineate the difference between light and dark magic, or white and black magic. It's this idea that I think everybody, to a certain extent, is a magician or weaves magic in whatever way they do. But it's the intention behind your will that delineates whether it's light, gray, or dark magic. And I think that with everything I'm attempting to do all the time, all of my artwork, all of my sacraments, my creative endeavors, the engagements that I have with friends and family, and just reality itself, I'm always coming from a place of love and care and gratitude with everything that I do. So because of that, the artwork that I make, the magic that I spin, the magic that I manifest is imbued with these attributes. So a lot of times you can tell whether something is light or dark magic. Like, for instance, I think that the entire concept of vaccines is a form of dark magic, because I don't believe that those things actually help you. I think we're being lied to with enormous academic fraud, and those things are actually really harmful to us. I think fluoridated water is a form of dark magic. It's a neurotoxin inhibitor. It's not good for our teeth. I think that heliocentrism and the concepts of evolution and this nihilistic idea of the Big Bang Theory, that we evolved from some primordial soup, is actually a form of dark magic. It's manipulation, it's academic fraud, it's deception, it's lies, it's inverting true knowledge, it's inverting the truth itself. And then so you always have to ask yourself, when you look at anyone's intention or the artwork that people make, or the poetry they spin, the music that they make, what kind of frequency does that intention resonate in? Is it a dark, heavy, oppressive energy field? Or is it uplifting and hopeful and expansive and ambient? So in essence, I think the difference between those two primordial forces is love and fear is an insidious force and a generative force. And I've always overwhelmingly, especially now in this second act of my life, I'm brimming with light. As you can see behind me, the sun. I'm climbing the mountain of Lux. I think I'd like to talk about, in the context of art school and being an artist, is a huge part of my identity as being a tattooist. I started tattooing back in 1993. It's been 27 years, and it's been a long haul. Almost 3 decades into this tattoo journey, and to say that I'm just now warming up is an understatement. I'm still so excited about tattooing and about continuing to explore the tattoo narrative that I'm literally completely brimming with ideas and concepts and overwhelmed with ideas, and every time I meet new people I instantly have these eureka moments about different visions for different friends and comrades and collectors that I meet. I think what happens when you've been tattooing as long as I have, and you've adamantly and aggressively attempted to get a handle and work in so many different styles that I have over the years, is that you end up having this ability to juggle a lot of different visions and ideas and genres into a cohesive whole, where certain people have a certain particular aesthetic disposition that you will be drawn to or that you'll pick up on, and then you'll find out these little subtle accents and interests that they have that you can add in and pepper some elements and some decorative embellishments to amplify the particular constitution of these different people that you meet. So I really like the eclectic approach to tattooing, where you're not really quite sure about what you're going to manifest or do until you actually meet the person, and then you get a handle on what they like and what they're interested in and their life intrigue, and you kind of consult and talk and envision together, and then the idea just unfolds and presents itself. So I've always had a disposition to do more progressive, kind of avant-garde or unusual creative ideas that are not really part of the homogenous kind of tattoo scene where everyone tattoos in these really strict, formal styles, and you can't really tell one artist from another, that stylistically it all looks pretty similar. I've never been drawn to that. I consider myself kind of almost with every new season and with every new piece, I try to reinvent myself, and I try to constantly have an innovative, kind of progressive approach to everything that I do. I like almost every piece to be relatively singular and unique to that person, and though I do stylistically work in similar persuasion at times during different seasons, there's always a sense of growth and expansiveness with my work, and it's something that I've been really proud of, and also something that I deliberately look for. I'm always looking for novelty and interesting, cool ideas that I've never done before, that I've never been even attempted in tattooing. So I'm always looking for that infinite novelty, that just being able to kind of redefine myself. So I'm in this exciting era now where I'm just a traveling, kind of nomadic artisan, tattooist, philosopher, researcher, rebel rouser type persona or lifestyle. There we go. Let's come to an end. Let's talk about being nomadic, traveling, being on the HOPEN road. I've always traveled in some form or context, even when I was younger in the 70s and stuff, growing up, being born in 71 and traveling a lot in the 70s and the early 80s with my family. My father took us out west and out to the southwest, out to the northwest. He took us south, he took us to the east coast. We kind of, every year we would go on these family road trips, and I have these just really fond memories of traveling as a young kid in the 70s. The most epic one we went on our 18th year, my twin brother and I, Mitchell, and my father, who have both passed on years ago, we drove motorcycles out to the west coast, from Indiana all the way to Southern California to Los Angeles, and then rode up Highway 1 all the way up the coast to 50 miles south of Alaska, and then across the Canadian Rockies, Canadian Plains, and then came down in Michigan and worked our way back down into Indiana. We were gone for 6 weeks, and I think we drove 8,500 miles, and I've just always, that was the foundation of my traveling needs. And now as a tattooist, I've always traveled quite a bit, not as much as I would have liked to early on, because I had a family and kids and all that, and had a lot of studios I was affiliated with. But whenever I could, I would hop on the road and go on these little road trips. And it really wasn't until I moved to Maine and I picked up a van. I always wanted to get a Ramblin' van, and I had the Twine Street Rambler for about 10 years. And I would ride that up and down the coast like once or twice a year, and would go on these road trips and would tattoo up and down the coast, and would go hang out with my southern friends in Georgia, and then would tattoo along the way. And hey, as of right now, I'm going across a bridge here into Maine. So I finally made it back up into Maine on this 3-day march up the coast from Georgia. Speaking of traveling, I'm doing it right now. But yeah, so traveling is a big part of my lifestyle, particularly now. I'm in this really nomadic era where the tattoo industry is really under attack, and it's really, a lot of independent businesses are struggling right now in this post-COVID 1984 economic assault on our sovereignty and our ability to make a living and stuff. So I found that traveling on the road has really helped me be able to survive and to be sustainable. So I am traveling quite a bit now, and I'm living out on the road and out of my van most of the time. I do have some safe havens I go to and retreat to here and there, but overwhelmingly I'm literally on the HOPEN road and traveling and being nomadic and bringing my craft to different people in different areas. And I don't think it's something I'm ever going to give up. I'm always going to travel in some context, and I really like the idea of taking my craft to people that aren't able to travel far away to come find me, so I'm able to go connect with them. And what I really do like about this era is that my tried and true kindred community of people that I'm connected to are friends I've had for years and for decades, and also new friends that I've developed and gathered along the way. And everybody's just been amazingly supportive and positive and receptive and open to all my curious ideas and my kind of unusual approach to tattooing with all of my kind of progressive ideas. So there we go. That one's come to an end. Ayahuasca, the sacred entheogen realm of hyperdimensional gnosis. I recently did ayahuasca last month, and I've done it 12 times prior to that, back in the 2012 era. For a few years I started getting a relationship with it. Took 8 years off and recently found myself with the opportunity to experience it again. And amazingly, I ended up taking a heroic dose both nights. And I mean, maybe the first night was lighter, the second night was heavier. But both nights I found myself completely 100% in the light. Like my being was just brimming with love and care and harmony and compassion and empathy for the human condition, for all beings, for all sentient beings, for every fabric of life itself. But I could see the darkness around me. And the thing about that realm, I think, that I've learned is that you have to fill your temple with love and care and hope and joy, while you also acknowledge that the darkness is afoot and the darkness is on the peripheries, waiting for you to fall from grace and to not be focused in your center. It's almost like the vampiric metaphor that you have to allow the vampire over the doorsill of your house. You have to give it consent. Well, in that realm, it's the same way. I did not give consent either night that I took the sacrament or that I drank the sacrament. And the darkness wasn't allowed to come into my temple because I did not give the darkness consent. I think it's that the lack of that knowledge, and not only in that psychedelic entheogen realm of that sacred medicine, but also in everyday living. In everyday living, we can acknowledge the darkness afoot. We can acknowledge the insidious, evil, diabolical elements and forces at play. But we don't need to fill our temple with them. We can be aware of them. We can look them in the eyes and say, I see you, but you're not welcome across the doorsill of this temple body. But I think it's important as a sacred warrior is to study and know about the darkness, to acknowledge it so you have knowledge and power to say no, the proverbial no, the primordial no, the ancient forbidden word no. I do not consent to the darkness coming over and filling my temple. On the contrary, you fill it with light and love and care. And every action you do is brimming with that. And every interaction you have with people is full of these higher frequencies. The tonalities of the cymatic energy field coming from Logos and God and creation itself. But you also acknowledge and study and research the darkness while you're coming from a place of love and compassion and care. I think that's what that realm has taught me, is that there's nothing, we will never ever defeat the darkness. It will always be there. I think it's part of the prima materia of reality itself. But you could choose to show allegiance to the light, and you could choose to be a warrior imbued with love, and to not allow the darkness to take you down. And I think that's why in this new era, I'm so disarmingly joyful and happy. It's because that realm in part has taught me that I had the free will to decide every single day what kind of psychedelic experience I want to have. Because every single day is like having an intense sacrament. That's it. On to the next one. Alright, let's go ahead and set this timer. 5 minutes. What should we talk about this time? Since we talked about let's see here. Okay. Alright, spontaneously I want to talk about Tartaria. I've been researching Tartaria now for about 3 years or so. I got into it in the wake of the whole geocentric flat earth narrative, and actually after about 10 or 15 years of researching and studying almost everything interesting in the alternative media research community, there's not a topic I haven't ravaged through. So I think what I found in the Tartaria community is that generally speaking, these people are more likely to have studied and researched and unraveled a lot of different truths connected to this concept of trying to get a handle on true reality, on truth, on you know, the essence of trying to extrapolate a sense of connection to what our true history is. And the fascinating thing about Tartaria is that I think that it really, without, oh, how should I say this? I'm just, a part of me wants to, you know, basically give a broad overview of what Tartaria is, but let's just say that you've already done your basic research on the topic and you know about some of the ideas around it, like say elements around the mud flood and Antiquitech and star forts and the Greco-Roman architecture and the fake history and Anatoly Fomenko and John Levi, Martin Ledke, you know, all of the amazing researchers that are associated. Let's just assume that you already have a basic foundation of what Tartaria is. And if you haven't, I beg you to actually to do some research. And with that stated, I kind of want to have a more elevated resolution on it, is that what I find so empowering about Tartaria is that if this narrative is true, which I think it is completely overwhelms me with joy and with hope that in the not so distant past there was a civilization that was arguably based in logos and in natural law and in creating and manifesting artwork and architecture and painting and literature and music that was literally reflecting sacred geometry and cymatics and sonoluminescence and using all the four elementals of nature, the fire, water, earth, air, that the alchemists talk about to extract ether, etheric energy, and to pull energy from the ether to heal us and to give us longer lives and to calibrate our spirits to this hyperdimensional realms that we live in. I think it was probably a time that the mystics were completely calibrated and tuned into all the subtle energy attributes and some of the ideas that, you know, that some of these people were living for hundreds of years and were maybe breatharians and were manufacturing and building and creating some of the most exquisitely stunning manifestations of art that you can barely even comprehend how they created them. I think that it was a time that it must have been so amazing to be living and to be an artist and a poet and a lover and a philosopher and an architect and a craftsman and an intellectual, and that the true idea of the Renaissance man was probably what it was like for all Tartarians or anybody who lived in this golden era. I really like the idea that the 1,000 years of fake history that were implanted into the narrative around around the Dark Ages was maybe 1,000-year reign of Tartaria. That was like the golden era. It was an era where Christ consciousness and Krishna consciousness and the illuminated beings that we heard about was probably very prevalent, and that the only way that this architecture, this building, and the music and the art could have been manifested was that if you were connected to Logos and to creation, and if you were connected to geocentrism and to transcendental science, to all these beautiful attributes that you only associate with higher consciousness. The general sentiment, I think, is this. The Tartaria, which arguably wasn't that long ago, was an incredible time to be alive. It must have been... Sky clock. I'm a geocentrist, aka flat earther, been in the movement for 5 years now, been studied and researched, put in thousands of hours of pondering and research and studying into this narrative. I consider myself a syncretist also, and really like the idea of the cosmic egg model with the toroidal energy field, and a lot of that narrative around Martin Kenny, Mike Williams, Santos Bonacci, etc. And one of the things that I find so stunningly beautiful and magnificent about being a geocentrist is this concept of the sky clock. So above us appears to be this firmament, this rotating disk with a fixed star field that's literally never changed any parallax, never movement between the constellations. It's always the same rotating star field, which is one layer. And then there's all these other layers, like each planet or planete, each luminary, the sun and the moon, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, etc. appear to be in their own rotation. All of them collectively are presenting this transcendental sky clock, this unbelievable timepiece hovering above us, literally giving us the seconds and the minutes, the days, the weeks, the months, the years, the decades, the centuries, the millennia, the aeons, the grand cycles, the solar minimum and maximums. Like, it's literally clicking by like a watch. It's like finding a Victorian timepiece in the woods and you pick it up and you're like, obviously this was made by some intelligent human. Look at this beautiful Victorian timepiece, this stopwatch, look at the stunning mechanics, look at the craftsmanship. It's the same thing when we look up into the night sky, but it's more metaphysical, it's transcendental, it's hyper-dimensional, it's beyond description. Like when you look up at the sky during the day and at night, you're literally looking at a sky clock, a timepiece, made by the Creator, made by the Great Riddle, made by the Highest High, made by God, by Jehovah, whatever adjectives or concepts or philosophies you want to project onto this great riddle. You still cannot deny the fact that it's a stunning creation. Look at that. You still cannot deny the fact that it's a stunning creation, and that the sky clock above is really one of the most powerful and beautiful truths and proofs that it's overwhelmingly a geocentric terra firma that we're living in, and that there's no way that that star field and that whole timepiece could literally stay the same for millennia if we were spinning in space at these insane velocities. The night sky would be continuously changing night after night, year after year, century after century. Would never ever be the same. The Earth is flat. We live in a geocentric system, arguably a cosmic egg model, toroidal energy field. I'm a syncretist. I'd like to talk about anarchy, what I believe true anarchy is, and the failings of the weaponized form of anarchy that the new rise of the radical left with Antifa is misrepresenting the tradition with. I think the purest form of anarchy is spiritual anarchy or transcendental anarchy. And it's where you come at it from the mystic's perspective of weaving consciousness and spirit and ether into the philosophy of not allowing anyone to govern your sovereignty or to rule above you. So this idea that we're allowed to, or we should be allowed to in the proper context, rule over ourselves without the status ideology of the left or the right, or particularly the radical left or the right, pushing and cramming ideologies and dogmatic belief systems into our psyche and demanding that we comply and appeal and consent to every one of their tenets, I think, is a form of fascism. So traditionally, this idea that the right or the neo-fascist is actually turned into the far right and the far left are actually a form of neo-fascism in the state that they're demanding that you appeal to their, what I would consider, their extremely draconian and rigid ideologies. The problem with this mysticism, or the problem with this philosophy, is that it's lacking the mystical tenets of natural law. And in natural law, that demands that you do no harm to anybody in any form, whether it's emotional, philosophical, spiritually, academically, psychically. Absolutely no form of violence on any level. And in the same context, you take no harm from any threat that threatens your sovereignty or your freedom. So you have the right to self-defense against an attack. So academic fraud, intellectual fraud, emotional assault, spiritual assault, physical assault, all those things have the right to, you have the right to defend yourself against them. But if anarchy was actually based in true natural law, where everybody was taught that the number one tenet is to harm no one under any context, then there wouldn't be any coercion or duress to force people into believing and appealing to a particular doctrine. Oh, here I go. I got a toll booth. This kind of threw me off a second. $3. There you go. Thank you, brother. So the reason why anarchy cannot exist right now in the context, and the reason why it's not a viable ideology, is the lack of teaching natural law. If we actually taught natural law and everybody followed the basic tenet of the no aggression principle, then we wouldn't have to worry about violence in the context of not having government overseeing us. But the problem now is not only is government threatening us with violence if we don't consent to all of their laws, but also the far left and the right is threatening violence if we don't consent to their ideologies. So the problem is with violence. It's not only physical violence that they're both doing on both sides to the general populace, but it's also academic, spiritual, emotional, psychic violence. So they're actually breaking one of the main tenets of natural law, which is the no aggression principle. And because of that, because I consider myself a true anarchist, I actually refuse to consent or bend a knee to any of their crazy ideas. So I'm actually defending myself against the academic fraud and the intellectual fraud and the spiritual. There we go. Time's up. Well, it's hard not to talk about germ theory in contrast to terrain theory in this particular year of 2020. Immediately when all this stuff happened in March of this year, like I always do, my default mode, my modus operandi is to just start researching the topic and see what I learned from it. And I was pretty taken aback and shocked to realize that there's been a 150-year debate happening between germ theory and terrain theory, with germ theory being presented by Louis Pasteur with this idea that viruses exist outside the body and multiply and grow and can infect a clean host. And then that clean host can get sick, and then that bacteria or that virus can infect another healthy host, and on and on and on, forming a pandemic spread of this virus. But in reality, I came to find out that viruses are actually created by the body. They're solvents that actually the body creates in order to arrest and go around a toxic particulate in your body, like a neurotoxin element from the postmodern era that we live in, or some kind of toxic particulate from this toxic terrain of the modern life that we live in. So it creates a virus around that and then flushes it out of the body. So in reality, viruses are actually a good thing. You want your body to be in a state of remission, to heal itself, to create viruses to cleanse the body. And then in that process, they release exosomes. And the exosomes are a byproduct of the body creating viruses that are actually cleansing and cleaning the body out. And that in the testing, the false positive testing, they're only looking for exosomes. And when they find the exosomes, because your body's in a state of remission, they say you have COVID, which is that concept of the false positive. But the idea is that if immediately when this was presented, the terrain theorists at the time were like, if the germ theory is correct and viruses exist outside the body, then you have to satisfy this thing called Koch's postulates, which is basically prove to us using, following these 5 to 6 different steps, where you find the virus, you isolate the virus, you purify it, you cause it to reproduce, you reinfect a clean host, you make that host have the same symptoms of the illness that you were focusing in on, and then you get that sick person that you infected with, and then you grab the bacteria, not the bacteria, but you grab the virus from them, out of them, and then you reinfect a clean host. You do the process over and over and over again. That concept of Koch's postulates has literally never been satisfied. There's not one scientific experiment proving or satisfying Koch's postulates. The entire idea is based on theoretical virology that's never been proven. Germ theory is still theoretical. It's not real science. It's pseudoscience being presented as fact. Not that bacteria don't exist, but the concept of a virus, a contagion that multiplies and can infect a clean host that exists outside the body, that's a misnomer. Oh man, what a topic. This whole idea of the transgender narrative. Talk about a divisive and very challenging topic to talk about in any context, especially from a critical light. And it's been with us, I think, since 2015 or ever. For the last 5 years, it's just exploded onto the fabric of culture. But recently I had this epiphany about this whole narrative, which I've been avoiding like a hot potato for years, man. What a challenging topic to get your thoughts around. But what I realized recently is that the whole thing is a misnomer because it's coming from an atheistic, nihilistic, existential scientism cult backdrop. The science that's pushing this transgender narrative is based on atheism and anti-spirit. So they're presenting this idea that gender is only relevant to the physical body, that your gender fluidity is relevant to your body. And they're completely avoiding the transcendental idea that the spirit itself, consciousness, is actually what they would say gender fluid. So I had this epiphany a few weeks ago. I was like, oh, the alchemical marriage of the sacred masculine and feminine archetypes within the spirit. That's what the alchemist is striving for. Elevating base consciousness into higher consciousness is in part merging these two beautiful forces, the masculine and the feminine energies. And me as a spiritual being, I could honestly say I am gender fluid spiritually, but my body is 100% masculine. I'm actually completely the male physiology, male anatomy, and I love it. I love being a man. I love having a masculine physiology. But I'm even more proud of the fact that my spirit, my consciousness is gender fluid. And that's where they've taken the alchemy out of this modern conversation. All of these kids who are toying with this idea aren't thinking about it spiritually. They've actually completely debased the alchemical tradition of the sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine archetypes as the hero's journey. It's your great work, they say, that you're only ready to do in the distillation after you're in your 40s or 50s. is literally the marriage of these two forces. And I'm there right now, and I've married them. And I have an equal distribution of male and female energies within me. My spirit is fluid between the two, but my body is masculine. And that's what's so criminal and frustrating about this, is that when you take consciousness out of the equation, out of science, out of trying to extrapolate what this big riddle is, you're missing half of the equation. And because of that, they've been able to weaponize this concept of this tradition as an alchemist to marry these two forces. And if all these people could still embrace whatever physiology they have, but know that their spirit is transgender or gender fluid or whatever buzzwords you want to attribute to it in this modern, context. Use whatever words you want, whatever vocabulary, whatever buzzwords. But know that that's part of it. That's the tradition, the mystical tradition of the alchemist, is to marry those two forces. So here I am, having this epiphany at this late hour, after they've completely destroyed and debased an entire generation by not celebrating the fact that their spirits, our ultimate goal is to unite these two forces. Transhumanism. The problem that I have with transhumanism, the concept behind it, it's this idea that there needs to be an improvement on what it means to be human. That the creation or the creator didn't make us good enough. That we need to augment our bodies with technology to make us more efficient and more intelligent. And we need to merge the long lineage of Homo sapiens with tech. It's this idea to transcend humans, to transcend what it means to be human. So I find it actually a total disrespect and an insult to the magical realm that we've inherited. And to think that we can use technology to enhance our bodies is a misnomer. One of the things that I don't like about the transhumanist ethos and philosophy and the scientism cult around it, it's that it's based on this idea that consciousness is not primary, that consciousness and spirit do not exist at all. So it's based on a fake pseudoscience of a materialistic reductionist scientism that doesn't even consider that spirit or consciousness exists at all. There's actually kind of a nihilistic, atheistic concept that when you die, your spirit or your consciousness dies with you, that there is no spirit, there is no subtle energy, there is no metaphysics, there's no hyperdimensional reality. But I just simply don't believe that. For them to promise us, to give us, to push an atheistic, nihilistic, existential scientism cult on us, and then promise us immortality by uploading us into by capturing our consciousness in ones and zeros, and to upload us into some cyborg and give us immortality into some kind of computer mainframe matrix, sounds absolutely miserable. But they don't need to promise that, because I think that consciousness is already infinite. I already think we're immortal beings of awareness, and that we're just going to go back to the source. You know, if you're based in love and care and compassion and truth, and you're aligned with the light and not the darkness, then when you pass on, you're going to just go back to the source. That consciousness is immortal. So this silly notion that transhumanism is going to promise us immortality is absolutely an insane idea, and something that's completely contrary to my philosophical and mystical concept of what true reality is. We're already immortal beings of light, arguably. We're beings of we're a pure spirit of consciousness being downloaded into this material realm, having this brief transient experience with these fleeting avatar bodies. Our spirits, our soul will continue on. See, I'm completely apprehensive about the transhumanist agenda. I do not like the rise of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, and I think the IoT and the 5G tech grid is basically artificial intelligence and AI attempting to manifest itself into this idea of the singularity happening is horrifying. That's the end. My 5 minutes is up. Man, this game is fun. It's pretty intimidating. You gotta like stay focused, and man, I like it. Back in Maine, living in the shadows, staying low key, being nomadic. I'm definitely a nomad at heart. Well, with that stated, this is the end of the East Coast ramble. It's been an awesome month-long road trip. Pull out the gloves and the scarf, and the layers, and the long johns. I'm ready for the winter. I'm ready for this year to come to an end.
Chegane me che di non è